Welcome to my live podcast, Dyslexic Life with Jo Rees, the place where I normalise where dyslexia shows up in everyday life. And big topic today, because redefining how society perceive dyslexia is kind of what I feel my purpose and passion is at the moment. So last night in a coaching call, I was asked at what point or why did I suddenly start to post to social media? Like, what was my purpose? What was my reason behind doing that? And that kind of really got me thinking, because I really felt that my reason behind doing it was because I wanted to show people that there was another way with dyslexia. So I didn't actually get my diagnosis of dyslexia until I was 34. And I literally had no idea I was dyslexic until I went and did my specialist dyslexic training at 28. And by that point, I'd done A-levels, I'd done a degree, I'd trained to be a primary school teacher, and I'd been a primary school teacher. And I can honestly say it had not crossed my mind at any point that I could be dyslexic. And it wasn't until I did my specialist dyslexic training that I suddenly realised how many dyslexic people I had missed through my teaching. And luckily, I'd only been teaching about 6 years, but I'd missed so many. But for me, I really felt like I had a responsibility to help people understand that dyslexia isn't necessarily what society thinks it is. Like, when we think of dyslexia, we tend to think of that really old-fashioned model of people with no literacy skill at all. And whilst, of course, dyslexia impacts literacy skill, I'm not for a minute saying that it doesn't impact literacy skill, but actually it impacts so much more than literacy skill. You know, I know as an assessor, it's a spectrum of things. And you know, depending on where those things are in that spectrum, working memory, processing, phonological awareness, intelligence, underlying ability, all of these things impact how dyslexia shows up. So for me, when I went and got my diagnosis, my reason wasn't really to be a victim of dyslexia, or it was to try and understand how my brain worked, and actually to empower the people that I was going to work with in the future. And at the time, I was still a Senko in school, even though I trained to become a specialist dyslexic teacher. I'd been made redundant, and I'd gone back to being a Senko in school. And I was really frustrated because I knew how to support and teach people with dyslexia, and I knew that the curriculum didn't include that. I knew it was really difficult to have the budget and resources for funding. So for me, I went to get that diagnosis because actually, if I'd achieved what I'd have achieved without knowing I was dyslexic, imagine what you could achieve if you knew you were dyslexic from a really early age. And at the time, my son was really struggling, and I suspected he was dyslexic. He was only 5 or 6 at the time, and he didn't particularly need a diagnosis. But I was like, actually, if I can be really sure that it's dyslexic, I know it runs in families, he's probably dyslexic too. So I went and got my diagnosis. And I can't lie, when I got my diagnosis, it was a really odd feeling. And recently, one of my children got a diagnosis, a formal diagnosis of something. And after they got the diagnosis, it was really interesting, the words they used, and they were so articulate. And it really kind of put into perspective how I felt. And they said, "You just feel dirty." And I knew exactly what they meant. Because a diagnosis changes everything and nothing all at the same time. Like, you grieve for that part of you that didn't know you were dyslexic, but really wanted and needed the support and didn't get it. You're angry because why did nobody notice this before? Why did nobody point it out? You also kind of have that whole, that means there's something wrong with me. I can't lie. You do feel like that explains the bit of me that's broken, or the bit of me that doesn't work as well. So I exactly got what they meant. And, you know, we're weeks on from that now, and it does get better with time. You begin to process it. But I think for me, the way I processed it was I wrote a book. So I wrote a book called, or started writing a book, which I self-published, and I can honestly say it is one of my greatest achievements and proudest things. And I get quite emotional when I think about it now, because don't forget to smile. It's called A Hidden Memoir Uncovering the Hidden Difficulties. Sorry, a memoir uncovering the hidden difficulties of dyslexia. And it's all about where dyslexia hid in my childhood, in my life, all the places that it was that nobody knew where to look. So I wrote the book as a really therapeutic write, and it's vulnerable. Like, I put it all out there. I talk about my mental health. I talk about my overdose when I took my GCSEs. I talk about my low confidence and self-esteem. I talk about my lack of worth. I talk about how my husband basically saved me, the trumpet playing husband, kind of saved me. He completely changed my trajectory, and how I believed in myself because he just loved and accepted me for who I was and kind of saw through my dyslexia. But it's a book about me, but it's about all the places where dyslexia hid. And I wrote it, and I was vulnerable, and I put those words on a page because I didn't want people to go through what I went through. And I wanted to find a way to raise awareness that wasn't necessarily campaigning, because I wasn't in a position to be strong enough to do that at the time. But it was a way of me making sense of my diagnosis, but helping others at the same time. And I'm really proud because I did self-publish it, and it really wasn't easy. And I had some incredible friends around me that really helped me. And I know that they listen to this podcast as well. One of them helped me edit it. One of them, we went through it line by line by line and drank a lot of wine. Another one of them designed the cover for me. And my friends are in it with pseudonames for sure. They're all a big part of my journey. And I've talked before about the cover of the book and where that came from. So I'm not going to talk about that in this episode, but for me, that book was the first step in helping society, helping people realize that dyslexia isn't necessarily what we think it is. Like, many people with dyslexia. So, and I was doing a feedback call with a parent last night after an assessment, and we were talking about how actually the issue with their child in the classroom isn't ability, it's accessibility. So the issue is that the child has got really high nonverbal reasoning, really high verbal ability, really high verbal skill, but they struggle to access the curriculum because their literacy skill is so weak, because they are not being taught in a way that enables them to develop literacy skill. They are not being taught in an evidence-based way. I mean, and as an aside, I received a message from a parent yesterday telling me that their local authority, the school, don't even accept specialist dyslexic reports. They just call it literacy difficulties, and they don't put any interventions in place other than what they already do. I mean, that's another whole conversation, isn't it? But I think so often we think of dyslexia and we think of mega weak literacy skill. And if I'm really honest, we think unintelligence, we think less than, we think they're going to be problematic, they're not going to be as capable. And the reality is that invisible limit, perception, incorrect misconception that society places on us then shapes how we move ourselves forward. And it's really interesting because I didn't get my diagnosis until 34. And I was at a conference the other day. I was a keynote speaker at a conference the other day, Katrina's Positive Dyslexia Conference in Twickenham. And there's an incredible lady called Sam Garner who talked all about mental health and resilience and dyslexia. And I felt really called out because she was talking about inspiration, but she was talking about how, you know, often people do push themselves to do really amazing things to prove themselves, to try to be inspirational, and it isn't necessarily inspirational. And I realized that actually so my English teachers, my A-level teachers at school told me that I wasn't university material. So my English teachers didn't pick up that I was dyslexic, and they told me that I was university material. My drama teacher saw my strengths, saw my potential, and she was like, you can absolutely do a degree if you want to do a degree. Now, nobody in my family had ever done a degree. Nobody had done a degree. Nobody had been to university. So for me to do that was like a massive step, and kind of not going against the grain, but doing something different. Again, making myself vulnerable, because half of my teachers didn't believe that I could do it. My parents didn't know anything about it. None of them had degrees. So I went off to university and I did a degree in dance and drama. And it was almost like from that point onwards, even though I didn't have a dyslexia diagnosis, it was almost like I needed to prove time and time and time again that I was intelligent. So literally from the minute I got my degree, I constantly kept doing academic courses. And I can't lie, it hurt me. It physically hurt me. It mentally hurt me. But it was almost like I collected them to prove to myself that I was clever, that I was university material and I could do it. So, I went on and did my postgraduate certificate in primary education. I went on to do a nurture group accreditation. I went on to do the NACE and SENCO accreditation, because I was a SENCO. I did my specialist dyslexic level 5. I did my diploma. At that point, I had enough credits to do a master's. All I had to do was write the big dissertation research project thing. And I just felt like I couldn't do it. I was so burnt out. But also, my son was struggling. I was a parent by then. And I went and got my dyslexia diagnosis. Now, my dyslexia diagnosis, as I said, it changed everything and nothing. And what's really interesting is from the minute I got my dyslexia diagnosis, I haven't done a single additional qualification. So in the last 14 years, having literally studied from the moment I left school, for the last 14 years, I haven't done a single actual postgraduate, master's. I've done nothing like that, which is interesting, because I did think I would go that route at one point. And I've had this big debate going on in my head. And to be fair, I had young children, but I had this big debate going on in my head. Is this because I've now got my dyslexia diagnosis and I'm actually, I'm not as clever, and actually that explains why the academic study has been really difficult and I don't need to put myself through that. And I did actually register for the level 5 dyscalculia, and I actually paid for it and never did it. And it wasn't until I was at that conference the other day and Sam was talking, and I realized the reason I haven't done any study since I got my diagnosis is not because I'm lazy. It's not because I'm trying to prove society wrong. It's the exact opposite. I don't feel like I need any more qualifications to prove my worth. I know I am really good at what I do. Since I've left education and set up my own business, I have really started to get my head around dyslexia and really play to my strengths. And I've realized that my strengths are equal to any academic qualification. And don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-education, and academia absolutely has a place. And I really couldn't be doing what I do now without the knowledge that I have now. But I think the difference is I don't feel like I need to prove to anybody that I'm clever, because I am so proud of my achievements. And interestingly, this book, one of my proudest achievements, because actually one of my natural strengths when I look back to when I was little, I loved writing. I absolutely love writing. If you go into my parents' loft, there's boxes and boxes of books, of stories that I've written, of poems. I used to love writing poems. The way I put words together, I could make somebody feel something. I could evoke emotion with the way I put words together. I'm dyslexic. I can't spell, but I love language. I love researching language. I love understanding words. I love putting words together to create meaning, which is very ironic, isn't it, as somebody with dyslexia? But actually, this book proved my English teachers wrong. And the amount of comments I've received from this book and messages, it sold so many copies for a self-published book. And I know it evokes emotion. I know people relate to it because I've received the messages, and I am grateful for every single one. But so at the moment, the main bulk of what I do is dyslexia assessment, and I'm moving into the field of being braver and mentoring. So I've been working with some one-to-one clients, and it's really interesting because a couple of things have come up this week that's really made me kind of think. So one of them has no formal qualifications and lives in a house full of people that all have lots of formal qualifications. And they don't view themselves as equal because they haven't got any formal qualifications. Yet their skills and what they do on a day-to-day basis are incredible. And the rest of the family couldn't function without that person doing those things. And that made me think of my dad. So I talk a lot about my dad, actually. He is my inspiration. He is the original undiagnosed dyslexic in my house, I think. And he doesn't have any formal qualifications, but my goodness me, he is incredible at building things with his hands. He is incredible at solving problems. In a crisis, who do I call? My dad, because he can think, he's level-headed, he can think straight. Yet he is one of the most emotionally literate, I'm going to get emotional now, people I know. But the problem is nobody valued those skills when he was at school. So, he should have been a carpenter. He should have had his own business. He can do the most incredible things. So no, he can't write things down, but he can just see how to create something out of wood, how to build something. He can fix a car, and he just thinks, his brain just thinks in that way, but he doesn't value those skills. And then I was coaching another client yesterday, and we were talking about emails and the fact that, they're running a professional business, and it's an incredible business, but actually it takes them a really long time to write emails. But because we've got this perception in society that in order to run a professional business, we have to communicate through really posh, grammatically correct emails, when actually she could be communicating with her clients through voice notes, because actually lots of her clients are neurodivergent, but society somehow doesn't value that in the same way. And then that got me thinking even further that I've got two of my children have done GCSEs, have done sixth form, one did the BTEC route, one did A levels, the third is just doing GCSEs at the moment, and that really like me, my third one, but she is busting a gut every night to do revision, to do practice papers, to keep up with the language, and it is all through written. She has to read it, she has to write it. If she could learn in a really practical way and she could talk stuff, A, she would achieve probably better, but B, she wouldn't be anywhere near as exhausted, because with dyslexia, we can develop reading and spelling skill, but our brains just do not think in a way that is as efficient. And actually what is happening is she is having to park, and don't get me wrong, I am all out on the extracurricular, and you'll know that if you follow me. But this year with her GCSEs, we have had to really look at putting more of a focus on school because of her tiredness, because she is too exhausted after school to do the extracurricular stuff. And she is doing extracurricular stuff, don't get me wrong, but we've had to really kind of look at that because her brain is burnt out because of all of the language. And that it's just made me think that we are still living in a society that just does not get dyslexia. It doesn't get the value of spoken language. It doesn't get dyslexic strengths. And I'm sorry, the education system is responsible for that, because, if I look at, so with my one-to-one clients, I have found my way back to my strengths. So I have been working really hard since I got my diagnosis to really look at what my strengths are and to really go back to trying to find those strengths, and I can pinpoint it for me. And I have had a lot of mentoring, coaching, counseling in the years. But for me, I can almost pinpoint when I lost myself, and it is around 8 years old. And I am trying to get back to that carefree, enthusiastic, loving life 8-year-old who was amazing at talking, who was brilliant at writing, telling stories, who was fantastic at connecting with people, who could just see when somebody wasn't okay and needed help and support, who, you know, loved life, who was really creative and chaotic, but created incredible things, achieved magic. And I didn't do it in a really structured academic way, but, you know, asked me to plan something and I could do it. I could make it happen. Like, you know, and I have got comorbid diagnosis of ADHD now as well, but I'm really trying to find my way back to that person and really find out what my strengths are, what my strengths were, and really play the hell out of them in this next era of my life. And on that, let's now talk about dyslexia and visibility. So it's Dyslexia Awareness Month. And I've decided that, you know, for me, the book was one way of raising awareness. I am doing it again without realizing it. I'm redefining how society perceives dyslexia. And this year I'm doing it through the Dyslexia Accelerator pack. So every day for 31 days, I am showing up. It is a paid group, but I'm showing up and I'm sharing a strategy, resource, hack, some piece of learning that I discovered in the last 15 years since I got my dyslexia diagnosis. So it might be a piece of academic knowledge. It might be a spelling tip. It might be something that I've learned about the dyslexia spectrum. It might be something that I've learned about how dyslexia shows up. So actually, because I now understand, so let's take travel, for example, you know, because I know how dyslexia impacts travel, I'm not an anxious traveler because I'm anxious and because I can't do it. I'm an anxious traveler because I can't process language quickly enough. So I have to allow lots of time. I have to have lots of strategies in place to enable me to do that. But before I understood that dyslexia and ADHD impacted that, my world was so small. Like, so understanding how that shows up for me so I can get the right strategies in place has enabled me to basically open my work. Like, my world is now huge. It's so much bigger. And the thing that I am most proud of, with 3 neurodivergent children that are all dyslexic, I have not passed that on to them. I have shown them from a really early age that actually, yes, travel can be stressful, but you can do it. You know, all 3 of my children have traveled abroad without me. You know, all 3 of my children would think nothing of getting on a boat, because I live on the island, and going onto the mainland without me. They could do it really easily. They can navigate public transport really easily because they've had the strategies in place from a really early age. And if you've got children and you want help and support with that, you need to check out the Confidence Blueprint program, because that is the exact parenting method approach. That is exactly how I've helped and supported my children be confident with their dyslexia. But you know, for me, understanding that travel is impacted by dyslexia has been a game changer. So the Dyslexia Accelerator Pack is running throughout Dyslexia Awareness Month. Like I say, it's a paid program. DM me if you want the details. And it's about redefining for you how dyslexia shows up and helping redefine how society perceive dyslexia. Because I think so often we know it, and this is the case with one of my one-to-one clients at the moment. We know that we are capable. We know as dyslexics what strategies we need to use to be successful, but we're too scared to use them because we're worried that society will judge us, that society will think less of us because we're voice noting instead of emailing, because actually I've got 90 million screenshots of every single train destination, you know. We're going to be judged for that, because sadly people do judge us because they don't get it. They think that we're cheating. They think that we're being lazy. They think that our typos define what we know about something. And the reality is, language is our issue. Written language is our issue. But that doesn't mean that we can't learn, and that doesn't mean that we're not capable. It just means we need to do things differently. It's about being different. And I'm going to finish with that phrase I said earlier. It's not about ability, it's about accessibility. And that is the perception that we need to change. People need to really understand what dyslexia is, because then that will help us access society in a much easier way and see more dyslexics fulfill their potential. Anyway, I'm proud of this one. This is the podcast. I am going to upload it to a podcast. I have been very brave and I have live streamed it everywhere. I don't think I'm ever going to get used to live streaming on more than one platform at the same time. It makes me feel a little bit sick. But actually, we're not growing if we don't feel a little bit sick. Like if we are, if we're not feeling a little bit uncomfortable, we're not pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone and we're not growing. And I'm going to leave you with this, actually, that, one of the things, and I've talked about this to my one-to-one clients, I've talked about this in coaching calls, I've talked about this on feedback calls to parents, on feedback calls to adults. Like, if we want to redefine how society perceive dyslexia, then we've got to model how we want people to see it. And the truth is, it is totally, and I wouldn't say it's overcomeable, it's manageable, because dyslexia is always there. Like, it never goes away. It always rears its ugly head when we least expect it. And that's another whole podcast episode. But actually, it's about using our strengths to support our weaknesses. So one of the things that I have done to massively support my children is I have modeled that things aren't easy. Sometimes things are not easy. Thank you so much for the comments, by the way, on the live streams. I do really appreciate them. I just can't read them because I've learnt my limit. If I try and read at the same time, I totally lose my train of thought. And I feel like this is something that just needs to come out today. So, one of the things is I've run 2 marathons, and I'm currently doing a sewing journal, if anybody is kind of following me on that. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm modeling and I'm showing my children, I'm showing my community, I'm proving to myself that actually sometimes things are not easy. And when things are not easy, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't give it a go. And it doesn't mean that it's not possible. It means that we have to frame what the success looks like for us. Okay. So for me, when I ran the marathon, it was when my son was really struggling with the transition from primary to secondary school. And it was about showing him that actually I didn't know how to run a marathon, just like he was really struggling academically. Like, I wasn't even really a runner. But actually, I could take some steps that would enable me to be able to cross the finish line. And it wasn't about getting a best time. I definitely wasn't going to win it. So if I wasn't going to win it, was there a point in me even running it? Well, yes, of course there was a point in running it, because actually it was about not comparing myself with others, running my own race, forgive the pun. But also through doing that, I was learning things about myself. I was building resilience. I was building strategies. But also, my purpose was raising money for a charity that was really close to my heart. And I was able to really model and show my kids that things are difficult. I had literally running the marathon is a doddle. Running the actual marathon is so easy, like so easy. The issue is the training leading up to that, and I had sores in places. I had to get the right type of clothing. I had to think about fueling myself. There were so many things I had to think about to get right. And I always remember the first marathon I ever run, and I was about a mile in. And I remember seeing my son in the distance, and he was about 10, and I can remember him shouting at the top of his voice, "That's my mum. She isn't a runner. She's running a marathon and she is amazing. She is showing me what's possible." And it makes me a bit teary now. But there have been times in their lives, in their educations, where things haven't gone to plan. And they've been like, actually, this is my marathon. Like, this is like you running your marathon. It's not going to be easy, Mum. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. GCSEs this year, that's my daughter's marathon. As we get through that and we navigate that and we find our way through that, dyslexia shows up differently in everybody, and she's my third to do it, but actually it's different for her because it shows up differently for different people. So yeah, having talked now for half an hour, I probably should go. If you haven't listened to the podcast, because this is a podcast, it is on all podcast platforms, because I'm aware I'm live streaming this. Dyslexic Life of Jo Rees, the podcast, the place where I kind of normalize how dyslexia shows up in everyday life. Please feel free to give it a listen, but I'm going to do it now. I'm going to sing live across the live streams. Just don't forget to always look on the dyslexic side of life because it's great. It's really, really great. Have a great week, guys, and I will see you soon.